3.2 Hunger, Hardship, and Popular Revolt. The 1830s were years of great economic hardship in Europe. The first half of the 19th century saw an enormous increase in population all over Europe. In most countries, there were more seekers of jobs than employment. Population from rural areas migrated to the cities to live in overcrowded slums. Small producers in towns were often faced with a stiff competition from imports of cheap machine made goods from England, where industrialization was more advanced than on the continent. This was especially so in textile production, which was carried out mainly in homes or small workshops and was only partly mechanized. In those regions of Europe where the aristocracy still enjoyed power, peasants struggled under the burden of feudal dues and obligations. The rise of food prices of a year of bad harvest led to widespread pauperism in town and country. The year 1848 was one such year. Food shortages and widespread unemployment brought the population of Paris out on the roads. Barricades were erected and Louis Philippe was forced to flee. A National Assembly proclaimed a republic, granted suffrage to all adult males above 21, and guaranteed the right to work. National workshops to provide employment were set up. Earlier, in 1845, weavers in Silesia had led a revolt against contractors who supplied them raw material and gave them orders for finished textiles but drastically reduced their payments. The journalist Wilhelm Wolff described the events in a Silesian village as follows. In these villages, with 18,000 inhabitants, cotton weaving is the most widespread occupation. The misery of the workers is extreme. The desperate need for jobs has been taken advantage of by the contractors to reduce the prices of the goods they order. On 4 June at 2 p.m., a large crowd of weavers emerged from their homes and marched in Paris up to the mansion of their contractor demanding higher wages. They were treated with scorn and threats alternately. Following this, a group of them forced their way into the house, smashed its elegant window panes, furniture, proclaim. Another group broke into the storehouse and plundered it of supplies of cloth which they tore to shreds. The contractor fled with his family to a neighboring village, which, however, refused to shelter such a person. He returned 24 hours later, having requestioned the army. In the exchange that followed, 11 weavers were shot. Box 1. The Grimm Brothers Folktales and Nation Building. Grimm's Fairy Tales is a familiar name. The brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were born in German city of Hanau in 1785 and 1786 respectively. While both of them studied law, they soon developed an interest in collecting old folk tales. They spent 6 years traveling from village to village, talking to people and writing down fairy tales which were handed down through the generations. These were popular both among children and adults. In 1812, they published their first collection of tales. Subsequently, both the brothers became active in liberal politics, especially the movement for freedom of the press. In the meantime, they also published a 33-volume dictionary of the German language. The Grimm brothers also saw French domination as a threat to German culture and believed that the folk tales they had collected were expressions of a pure and authentic German spirit. They considered their projects of collecting folk tales and developing the German language as part of the wider effort to oppose French domination and create a German national identity. Discuss. Discuss the importance of language and popular traditions in the creation of national identity. 3.3 1848 The Revolution of the Liberals. Parallel to the revolts of the poor, unemployed, and starving peasants and workers in many European countries in the year 1848, a revolution led by the educated middle classes was underway. Events of February 1848 in France had brought about the abdication of the monarch, and republic based on universal male suffrage had been proclaimed. In other parts of Europe where independent nation states did not yet exist, such as Germany, Italy, Poland, the Austro Hungarian Empire, men and women of the liberal middle classes combined their demands for constitutionalism with national unification. They took advantage of the growing popular unrest to push their demands for the creation of a nation state on parliamentary principles, a constitution, freedom of the press, and freedom of association. In the German regions, a large number of political associations whose members were middle class professionals, businessmen, and prosperous artisans came together in the city of Frankfurt and decided to vote for an all German National Assembly. On 18 May 1848, 831 elected representatives marched in a festive procession to take their places in the Frankfurt Parliament convened in the Church of St. Paul. They drafted a constitution for a German nation to be headed by a monarchy subject to a parliament. When the deputies offered the crown on these terms to Frederick Wilhelm IV, King of Prussia, he rejected it and joined other monarchs to oppose the elected assembly. While the opposition of the aristocracy and military became stronger, the social basis of parliament eroded. The parliament was dominated by the middle classes who resisted the demands of workers and artisans and consequently lost their support. In the end, troops were called in and the assembly was forced to disband. The issue of extending political rights to women was a controversial one within the liberal movement, in which large numbers of women had participated actively over the years. Women had formed their own political associations, founded newspapers, and taken part in political meetings and demonstrations. Despite this, they were denied suffrage rights during the election of the assembly. When the Frankfurt Parliament convened in the Church of St. Paul, women were admitted only as observers to stand in the Visions Gallery. Though conservative forces were able to suppress liberal movements in 1848, they could not restore the old order. Monarchs were beginning to realize that the cycles of revolution and repression could only be ended by granting concessions to the liberal nationalist revolutionaries. Hence, in the years after 1848, the autocratic monarchies of Central and Eastern Europe began to introduce the changes that had already taken place in Western Europe before 1815. Thus, serfdom and bonded labor were abolished both in the Habsburg dominions and in Russia. The Habsburg rulers granted more autonomy to the Hungarians in 1867. Source C. How were liberty and equality for women to be defined? The liberal political Karl Wecker, an elected member of the Frankfurt Parliament, expressed the following views. Nature has created men and women to carry out different functions. Man, the stronger, the bolder, and freer of the two, has been designated as protector of the family, its provider meant for public tasks in the domain of law, production, defense. Woman, the weaker, dependent, and timid, requires the protection of man. Her sphere is the home, the care of the children, the nurturing of the family. Do we require any further proof that given such differences, equality between the sexes would only endanger harmony and destroy the dignity of the family. Louis Otto Peters, 1819 to 95, was a political activist who founded a women's journal and subsequently a feminist political association. The first issue of her newspaper, 21st April 1849, carried the following editorial. Let us ask how many men, possessed by thoughts of living and dying for the sake of liberty, would be prepared to fight for the freedom of the entire people, of all human beings. When asked this question, they would all too easily respond with a yes, though their untiring efforts are intended for the benefit of only one half of humanity, men. But liberty is indivisible. Free men, therefore, must not tolerate to be surrounded by the unfree. An anonymous reader of the same newspaper sent the following letter to the editor on 25th June 1850. It is indeed ridiculous and unreasonable to deny women political rights even though they enjoyed the right to property which they make use of. They perform functions and assume responsibilities without, however, getting the benefits that accrue to men for the same. Why this injustice? Is it not a disgrace that even the stupidest cattle herder possesses the right to vote simply because he is a man, whereas highly talented women owning considerable property are excluded from this right, even though they contribute so much to the maintenance of the state? Feminist awareness of women's right and interest based on the belief of the social, economic, and political equality of the genders. Ideology system of ideas reflecting a particular social and political vision. Point 4. The making of Germany and Italy. 4.1. Germany. Can the army be the architect of a nation? After 1848, nationalism in Europe moved away from its association with democracy and revolution. Nationalist scientists were often mobilized by conservatives for promoting state power and achieving political domination over Europe. This can be observed in the process by which Germany and Italy came to be unified as nation states. As you have seen, nationalist feelings were widespread among middle class Germans who in 1848 tried to unite the different regions of the German Confederation into a nation state governed by an elected parliament. This liberal initiative to nation building was, however, repressed by the combined forces of the monarchy and the military, supported by the large landowners called Junkers of Prussia. From then on, Prussia took on the leadership of the movement for national unification. Its chief minister Otto von Bismarck was the architect of this process carried out with the help of the Prussian army and bureaucracy. Three wars over 7 years with Austria, Denmark, and France ended in Prussian victory and completed the process of unification. In January 1871, the Prussian King William I was proclaimed German Emperor in a ceremony held at Versailles. On the bitterly cold morning of 18 January 1871, an assembly comprising the princes of the German states, representatives of the army, important Prussian ministers, including the chief minister Otto von Bismarck, gathered in the unheated Hall of Mirrors in the place of Versailles to proclaim the new German Empire headed by Kaiser William I of Prussia. The nation building process in Germany had demonstrated the dominance of Prussian state power. The new state placed a strong emphasis on modernizing the currency, banking, legal, and judicial system in Germany. Prussian measures and practices often became a model for the rest of Germany. 4.2. Italy unified. Like Germany, Italy too had a long history of political fragmentation Italians were scattered over several dynastic estates as well as the multinational Habsburg Empire. During the middle of the 19th century, Italy was divided into seven states, of which only one, Sardinia Piedmont, was ruled by It- an Italian princely house. The north was under Austrian Habsburg, the center was ruled by the Pope, and the southern regions were under the domination of the Bourbon kings of Spain. Even the Italian language had not acquired one common form and still had many regional and local variations. During the 1830s, Giuseppe Mazzini had sought to put together a coherent program for a unitary Indian Italian republic. He did also found a secret society called Young Italy for the dissemination of his goals. The failure of revolutionary uprisings both in 1831 and 1848 meant that the mantle now fell on Sardinia Piedmont under its ruler king Victor Emmanuel II to unify the Italian states through war. In the eyes of the ruling elites of the region, a unified Italy offered them the possibility of economic development and political dominance. Chief Minister Cavour, who led the movement to unify the regions of Italy, was neither a revolutionary nor a democrat. Like many other wealthy and educated members of the Italian elite, he spoke French much better than he did Italian. Through a tactful diplomatic alliance with France engineered by Cavour, Sardinia Piedmont succeeded in defeating the Austrian forces in 1859. Apart from regular troops, a large number of armed volunteers under the leadership of Giuseppe Garibaldi joined the fray. In 1860, they marched into South Italy and the kingdom of the two Sicilies and succeeded in winning the support of the local peasants in order to drive out the Spanish rulers. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed King of United Italy. However, much of the Italian population, among whom rates of illiteracy were very high, remained blissfully unaware of liberal nationalist ideology. The peasant masses who had supported Garibaldi in southern Italy had never heard of Italia and believed that La Talia was Victor Emmanuel's wife. Figure 13. Caricature of Otto von Bismarck in the German Reichstag Parliament from Figaro, Vienna, 5th March 1870. Figure 14a. Italian states before unification, 1858. Figure 14b. Italy after unification. The map shows the year in which different regions, seen in figure 14a, become part of a unified Italy. Activity. Look at figure 14a. Do you think that the people living in any of these regions thought of themselves as Italians? Examine figure 14b, which was the first region to become a part of unified Italy, which was the last region to join, in which year did the largest number of states join. 4.3. The strange case of Britain. The model of the nation or the nation state, some scholars have argued, is Great Britain. In Britain, the formation of nation state was not the result of a sudden upheaval or revolution. It was the result of a long drawn out process. There was no British nation prior to the 18th century. The primary identities of the people who inhabited the British Isles were ethnic ones such as English, Welsh, Scot, or Irish. All of these ethnic groups had their own cultural and political traditions. But as the English nation steadily grew in wealth, importance, and power, it was able to extend its influence over the other nations of the islands. The English Parliament, which had seized power from the monarchy in 1688 at the end of a protracted conflict was the instrument through which a nation state, with England at its centre, came to be forged. The Act of Union 1707 between England and Scotland that resulted in the formation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain meant in effect that England was able to impose its influence on Scotland. The British Parliament was henceforth dominated by its English members. The growth of British identity meant that Scotland's distinctive culture and political institutions were systematically suppressed. The Catholic clans that inhabited the Scottish Highlands suffered terrible repression whenever they attempted to assert their independence. The Scottish Highland the Scottish Highlanders were forbidden to speak their Gaelic language or wear their national dress, and large numbers were forcibly driven out of their homeland. Ireland suffered a similar fate. It was a country deeply divided between Catholics and Protestants. The English helped the Protestants of Ireland to establish their dominance over a largely Catholic country. Catholic revolts against British dominance were suppressed. After a failed revolt led by Wolfe Tone and his United Irishmen 1798, Ireland was forcibly incorporated into the United Kingdom in 1801. A new British nation was forged through the propagation of a dominant English culture. The symbols of the New Britain, the British flag, Union Jack, the national anthem, God Save Our Noble King, the English language were actively promoted, and the older nations survived only as subordinate patterns in this union. Box 2, Giuseppe Garibaldi, 1807 to 1807 to 82, is perhaps the most celebrated of Italian freedom fighters. He came from a family engaged in coastal trade and was a sailor in the merchant navy. In 1833, he met Mazzini, joined the Young Italy movement, and participated in a republican uprising in Piedmont in 1834. The uprising was suppressed and Garibaldi had to flee to South America, where he lived in exile till 1848. In 1854, he supported Victor Emmanuel II in his efforts to unify the Italian states. In 1860, Garibaldi led the famous expedition of the Thousand of South Italy. Fresh volunteers kept joining through the course of the campaign till their numbers grew to about 30,000. They were popularly known as Red Shirts. In 1867, Garibaldi led an army of volunteers to Rome to fight the last obstacle to the unification of Italy. The Papal States were a French garrison was stationed. The Red Shirts proved to be no match for the combined French and Papal troops. It was only in 1870 when, during the war with Prussia, France withdrew its troops from Rome that the Papal States were finally joined to Italy. Activity. The artist has portrayed Garibaldi as holding onto the base of the root on the base of the boot so that the king of Sardinia Piedmont can enter it from the top. Look at the map of Italy once more. What a statement is the caricature making. Figure 15, Garibaldi helping King Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia Piedmont to pull on the boot named Italy, English caricature of 1859. New words, ethnic, relates to a common racial, tribal, or cultural origin or background that a community identifies with or claims.